It gives him or her momentum, and it winnows the field, usually to 2 or 3 candidates with a plausible path to the nomination.
Does it seem like it could do that this year, though, given what happened in Iowa?
Yeah, not just that, but I think we could wind up with 3 or 4 with at least a narrow path to the nomination. And that's not including, of course, former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg. So New Hampshire may not quite be as cruel as it usually is to presidential contenders.
So, Caitlin, let me ask you about Joe Biden. He, as we have mentioned, is not going to be at his New Hampshire watch party tonight. He is going to South Carolina. What should we take away from that decision?
That's right. Earlier today, he announced that he's packing it up and moving on to South Carolina. And remember, we have Nevada before that. South Carolina primary goes 4th in the contest. That has always been a part of the Biden plan, was that, yes, he may not do well in Iowa and New Hampshire, but he was looking towards the more diverse states of South Carolina and Nevada to really make his case. But I think if you see how he has actually done here, you know, he placed 4th in Iowa, he got some delegates, but not really. What does he do in New Hampshire? If he places further down, that does start to raise questions about his central pitch, which has always been electability. He's been arguing that he is the most electable candidate in this field, yet he's seeing Pete Buttigieg surpass him in a place like Iowa, especially doing better than him in those counties that flipped from Obama to Trump. And if he's not able to do well here, and if he's surpassed by someone like Amy Klobuchar, who has certainly sensed some momentum here and sensed an opening among potential Joe Biden supporters, what does that do to where his firewall is? Can he make it that far? And while New Hampshire and Iowa have been criticized for not representing the Democratic Party at large, there are questions about the kind of momentum that you get out of this and the money you're able to make out of that momentum. So those are the lingering questions for Biden.
Let's turn to some of the issues. Jamel, our CBS News exit polling shows that 58% of Democratic voters here support replacing all private insurance with a government plan. So what does it say about how voters here are approaching this issue of health care?
I think what we're seeing is that Democratic voters here have gone with the leftward trend of the Democratic Party at large. You look nationally, Democrats have said that they support more government influence over healthcare. They support a public option. They support Medicare for all. And New Hampshire voters are moving in that direction as well. I think to the extent that there is any difference, that there is a strong contingent of independent voters here, of moderate Democrats here, who are in that other 42%, right, who aren't so sure about that and who may be important voters for candidates like Amy Klobuchar, like Pete Buttigieg, people who are hoping to consolidate that moderate lane of the Democratic Party and win the nomination that way.
Dante, I know another important issue here is student loan debt. So our exit poll shows 67% of voters support free tuition for public colleges. Is that an issue that we've heard a lot about in this primary so far?
Yeah, a fair amount. And I think what it's done is divide younger Democrats from older Democrats. And younger vote, really, it hasn't been so much gender or even educational attainment that divides voters. It's been age. And Bernie Sanders, you know, appealing to voters under 30, 35 years of age, whereas Joe Biden, Amy Klobuchar appealed to voters, you know, 55, 65 and older. And so it doesn't surprise me that we see that kind of result from the exit polls.
Right, and in fact, we've seen Pete Buttigieg, for instance, going after, Bernie Sanders on this question. How do you pay for things that, you're talking about?
Right, and we see Sanders and Warren have both been on similar paths, but it seems as if Sanders has the advantage over Warren so far among young voters.
Yeah, Jamel?
Just on that age point, I think that's really critical. If you look demographically, across all the demographic groups, Sanders does very well with basically all groups under 40, whereas the other candidates are kind of competing for everyone else above that. And that Sanders' demographic advantage, at least with younger voters, is the thing that I think if he doesn't do as well as he expects to here, can still sustain him over the next several primaries and caucuses.
So that's a perfect segue to our next data point here. We learned that 75%, Caitlin, of voters say that the age of candidates is not important. So what should we make of that statistic?
That's right. It is really interesting to see Bernie Sanders' support among young people remain so strong. He's been campaigning on college campuses, having events with musicians, and really rallying the crowds. I think what we're also seeing in our CBS News Battleground Tracker before these results came out showed that his support, the intensity of Bernie Sanders' support, is the strongest among the candidates, and that's helped him. There are questions about how he expands his base. You also have someone like Pete Buttigieg who has been arguing for generational change, and I think that in the kind of lane that he's competing in, I think that's actually appealing to a lot of older voters that I've talked to on the campaign trail who are drawn to Pete Buttigieg. They tell me that they like the fresher face, that they want to see the Democratic Party kind of have a new generation to come into leadership. So that's also something that I think has been hurting Joe Biden, more so that older voters who are a key constituency for Joe Biden may be looking at Pete Buttigieg as kind of the next generation.
Caitlin, I also want to ask you, what was the state of New Hampshire expecting with respect to turnout? Because, going into Iowa, there were all kinds of estimates that perhaps it would approach record numbers that didn't necessarily materialize. What is it that you've heard from officials here?
Well, I talked to the chairman of the Democratic Party here, Ray Buckley, and I said, what's turnout going to be like? And he really tried to manage some expectations. He said it may be closer to 2016, definitely not going to be like 2008. And I said, why? In a year that so many Democrats are saying they're so excited to take on Donald Trump, they're really eager to find a candidate who can beat him. He said, look, there are so many choices that the voters are kind of saying, someone decide and let's all support whoever it is. And that's why you're seeing this kind of unity pitch coming from all of these candidates. Elizabeth Warren has made it part of her closing argument. She's been talking about someone who can unify the party. And I can say that at town halls that we've been to across the state over the past several days, that has been a theme from voters in their questioning. They're asking these candidates, okay, fine, how can you unite the Democratic Party and bring everybody back into this fold in what is expected to be a pretty protracted primary?
Yeah, and I feel like, Jamel, one thing that is worth reminding people about is that ultimately what we're talking about is the hunt for delegates here.
Right.
Can you just remind us about that? Because I think, we get caught up, obviously, in the narrative of who has momentum and this and that, but ultimately, for the candidates themselves, they are in a delegate chase here.
Right, and then sort of the big question of this primary, because there are so many candidates, because there are so many potentially viable front runners, is who is going to be able to get 50 plus 1% of delegates, if anyone. And to the extent that New Hampshire is really important, a big win here can help a candidate with a broad coalition, like in the unlikely event that it's Biden or like Bernie or potentially Warren, build up momentum going into the next primaries, going into Super Tuesday, to maybe get close to doing well enough to hit that delegate threshold and win outright.
Yeah, remind us of what that is, that delegate threshold for people.
I don't remember the exact number of delegates.
All right.
15.
It's 15. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and the idea is, though, you're changing the perception of the candidate with these stories, right? I mean, how would you kind of characterize that for people who, kind of say, well, if you're talking hard math and you're just looking at the calculation of who has the most, on paper, it doesn't necessarily look like New Hampshire has that many.
I mean, there could be a real difference between perception and reality tonight. If Amy Klobuchar finishes third, and let's say she gets 14% of the vote, she'll get the publicity of finishing third, which would be a surprise, might give her a little boost going into Nevada, but with 14%, she winds up with exactly 0 delegates out of New Hampshire, and that would mean the top two, let's say it's Sanders and Buttigieg, would basically divide all the delegates in New Hampshire because they're the only ones who pass the threshold. And that's not so important here in New Hampshire, only a couple dozen delegates. But when we go on to further contests, that threshold can play a big role in the delegate math.
Right, and by the way, that's probably something we'll hear from the opponents, of Amy Klobuchar, if in fact something like that plays out.
So interestingly enough, just today, the campaign of Elizabeth Warren put out a memo because she's been getting a lot of people being skeptical about the future of her campaign. And they said, look, there's still 98% of the delegates up for grabs here. And they're they're trying to make the argument that while this is all about momentum and while this is all about the headlines, that they think that these states, there's still a lot more race to be run here. And so you're looking at these candidates trying to outline for voters what their eventual path is. And it's really interesting. You know, we've been talking about how voters have been really undecided in this race. A lot of them are asking these candidates or wanting to know what their eventual path is like beyond New Hampshire. They're really kind of strategizing and trying to figure it out. So it's very telling that the Warren campaign put out that memo today to kind of signal to people kind of what they're thinking. A lot of numbers, but making clear, to your point, that there still are a lot of delegates to go.
So, Dante, voters in New Hampshire are also known, many of them, for declaring their independence and being undeclared. Remind us of the role that they could play with the results tonight.
Right. So really the largest pool of voters on the voter rolls in New Hampshire are neither Democrats or Republicans, but they are undeclareds. Often they're conflated with independents, but in fact, a lot of undeclared voters are really partisans in disguise who choose not to reveal their partisan identity because they don't have to. There's a smaller pool right in the middle who are independents, and those are two types. One is like actual people who see themselves in the center of the electorate, and the other is people who just don't pay much attention to politics. So it's easier to describe yourself as independent than just apathetic. And so they're the ones who might turn out, might not, if a particular candidate gets their imagination.
We have no idea. I mean, obviously we won't know until later tonight.
Right. I mean, I would think for a younger, disaffected independent voter, he's likely to turn out for Sanders if he's going to turn out at all.
Yeah.
Where, say, you know, a suburban, college-educated independent is probably looking at Buttigieg or perhaps Klobuchar.
Yeah. So, Caitlin, with just a couple hours left until the polls close, what are you going to be watching for tonight?
Well, I am looking for who comes in third place. And I know that kind of sounds strange, but we've seen these polls, Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg leading in the polls. And it certainly feels like, you know, after attending several of their events here over the week, that the momentum is certainly behind them. But does Amy Klobuchar, does she kind of rise up here? If she's able to rise above Joe Biden, if she's able to rise over Elizabeth Warren, she's able to kind of claim another day. Because this is all about momentum, it's all about news cycles, and it's all about raising money. So if she's able to come in a third place, maybe, I think that would be interesting. Or if Elizabeth Warren is as well. I think that's kind of the spot that I'm watching.
Jamel, what are you watching for?
Turnout. It's sort of key to the Sanders campaign's theory of the race, that they're going to win the primary and the general election by significantly boosting turnout, by turning out these disaffected voters, by turning out people who don't normally pay attention. In Iowa, the campaign says, listen, turnout was not what we expected to be, but we got young people to turn out at rates that they didn't turn out in the last cycle. So I'm just looking to see if they can actually get that turnout up. And if they can here, then maybe you can chalk Iowa up to just sort of Iowa being Iowa. But if they can't, then that is a real signal for the subsequent contests.
And what about you, Dante?
I'm looking at women with a college degree. We have in New Hampshire a long history of electing women to high office. Both of our senators served as governors. Both are women. Jean Shaheen, Maggie Hassan served as senator and as governor. We're used to voting, and I'm wondering whether at the last minute, perhaps, whether they will give either Elizabeth Warren or Amy Klobuchar the boost to fight another day.
All right, we'll be watching it all. Dante Scala, Caitlin Huey-Burns, Jamel Bowie, thank you all very much. Coming up, after a break, we will check back in with our Anthony Salvanto. He'll help us make sense of the exit polls and what's on voters' minds as they walk into the voting booth. You're streaming Red and Blue live from Manchester.
Good evening. The first ballots of Campaign 76 have given Jimmy Carter a commanding head start in the race for the Democratic presidential nomination. And President Ford a paper-thin lead for the Republican. The Republican contest in yesterday's New Hampshire primary took virtually the last returns to resolve. With more than 108,000 ballots cast in that primary, Mr. Ford beat former California Governor Ronald Reagan by only about 1,300 votes. So close was that finish that both camps saw it as victory.
You can watch CBSN 24/7.
We've got an amazing story to share with you.
Let's talk about the latest developments. There's so many levels to this.
We have a CBS News exclusive.
Fires in California. What happens next, and how does it all play out?
We are on a mission with NASA.
I understand you have some breaking news. It's not over yet, is the bottom line.
This is a massive operation.
It's quite an adventure here at CBSN.
It's been a day. Wow. That's not normal.
Our nation's capital, decisions are made here that affect all of us. And today, more than ever, people want truth, understanding, and accountability. So join us every evening as we bring you CBS News original reporting from around the world, while keeping our eye on what's going on right here in Washington.
The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell, now from Washington, D.C. Understanding the world begins with the right questions.
Do you trust Kim Jong-un?
Doesn't the blame reside with Jewel? Is it now our top terrorist threat?
With the right people.
So you have forgiven?
I have now.
Right here.
Check this out.
More news.
I'm Tony DeCoppel with CBS News.
More original reporting.
It puts everything in perspective.
We are on a mission with NASA.
Every morning on CBS This Morning.
We're going to begin with breaking news.
The biggest names in politics.
Whoa, that's news. It seems Iran's behavior is getting worse, not better. Are we at a tipping point where those decisions... Do you think that the investigation is in peril?
Face the questions you want answered.
Margo, it's a great question.
Good question. I do not know how to answer your question.
The president this morning tweeted something that I'd like you to clarify.
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan.
The first polls will be closing here in New Hampshire in a little more than half an hour. Let's go back to the CBS Broadcast Center in New York, where our Tanya Rivero is standing by with CBS News Elections and Surveys Director Anthony Salvanto. Tanya?
Thanks so much, Elaine. So, Anthony, before we get into some of the nitty-gritty, tell us how these exit polls work exactly.
Yeah, all these numbers that we've been talking about, all those boards you've been showing up there, Elaine, of what's on voters' minds. What happens is we, along with the other networks, send reporters out to these precincts where people are voting, and as they're leaving, exiting, hence the name, we ask them who they voted for and what was on their mind. So that's where you get the answers to those questions of what kind of things did you want in a candidate and what was your top issue, et cetera. And then what happens is, and I'll show you on this map of New Hampshire, which of course hasn't yet filled in, except for the couple of small townships where they've reported 1 or 2 votes in. You know, what happens is from each of these particular towns where we're going to have reporters, and I'm just sort of randomly adding, a few dots to this, we are going to gather up all that data and they all call it back in to headquarters where we add it all up. And then we look for patterns in it. And if there's a pattern for one candidate over another, we can start to give you a sense of the race as they go and collect that vote right there at the towns.
And some of the data is coming in already. You're starting to see some patterns, but what exactly are you looking for specifically, Anthony?
Well, polls haven't closed in most of the states yet, like I said, except for a couple of small towns, your Dixville Notches, et cetera, where they traditionally call in there a couple of results early. But what we do look for is, first of all, turnout. We're going to try to be gauging a size of what the electorate looks like. Now, I will say one of the key things I'm looking for is how many young people show up, how many independents show up, because we know from past years that those folks can vote very differently from older voters, and that's going to be one of the keys. And the other thing we're going to be looking for is by region, what happens down in the south part of the state versus the north, and I'll talk about that a lot tonight, Tanya.
Can you make make generalizations like older voters tend to vote in the morning and younger voters in the evening, or is that dangerous territory?
That does happen. That does happen very often. Oftentimes people who have to go to work have, maybe their plan is to vote after they get home from work, so they might vote later in the day. We can definitely see time of day effects from the exit poll. That's why you want to encapsulate the whole thing later on. And also, like I mentioned, by region. That's one of the reasons this map is going to start to become so important. Down in the southern part of the state, you're basically in the Boston media market, all down here. Up in here, you're maybe in the Vermont media market, but most of it really is that Boston media market. And down in the southern part of the state is where most of the population lives. We're going to be talking about Manchester a lot. We're going to be looking for population centers there and seeing how they do. A few less people up as you go north in the state there, up towards Berlin, but that could also be important at the end of the day.
What are some other ways the population changes as you go north?
It gets more spread out, it gets more rural, whereas down here, when we get to Manchester, when we get to Nashua, we'll be talking about that a lot because you're going to have a population where you've got at least half in many of these towns that are college degree holding, and we know that those folks are going to vote differently, at least if history is any guide. They're going to vote differently. And we also have very affluent towns down here, and we know that that could be a voting break as well. All of that in the suburbs of Manchester, around Portsmouth as well, and Nashua, all of those places. New Hampshire has a median income that's a little above, I think, the national average at like $70,000. So you're going to see a lot of breaks within those demographics, and that's the kind of thing we'll be looking for.
And we know New Hampshire has large numbers of independent voters. Do those tend to be gathered around certain geographical regions, or are they spread all throughout the state?
It's a great question. They are spread out, but we will be looking for whether or not they turned out in particular towns. And if there is a relationship between how many independents turned out in a given town and how a candidate is doing, then we can start to tell you how one candidate or another is doing among independents. And maybe, because independents will probably be around 40-odd% of this electorate, maybe how they're doing overall.
All right, exciting stuff. Anthony Salvanto, thank you so much. Elaine, we're going to toss it back over to you. Thanks so much.
All right, Tanya, thank you. Still to come, the opioid crisis has hit New Hampshire hard. We'll see how the epidemic is influencing voters and what they want to hear from 2020 Democrats. You're streaming Red and Blue live from Manchester.
I love New Hampshire. And I love Iowa, too. And I hope, with your help, to have the blessings and the opportunity to love a lot of other states in the days to come.
You can watch CBSN 24/7.
We've got an amazing story to share with you.
Let's talk about the latest developments. There's so many levels to this.
We have a CBS News exclusive.
Fires in California.
What happens next, and how does it all play out?
We are on a mission with NASA.
I understand you have some breaking news. It's not over yet, is the bottom line.
This is a massive operation.
It's quite an adventure here at CBSN.
It's been a day.
You can see the desperation in the journey simply by looking at the trail that's left behind.
So she says she's 17. She looks kind of like she's 12.
Said to me, if you tried to do this in New York City, take a picture of a man, he'd break your camera.
There's something very, very uncomfortable about this.
Today, a white supremacist lens.
This area can be the new Silicon Valley.
There was not a cot in the warehouse, not one cot in the warehouse.
We're so far deep at this point that there's no turning back. This is a long road ahead.
Understanding the world begins with the right questions.
Do you trust Kim Jong-un?
Doesn't the blame reside with Jewel? Is it now our top terrorist threat?
With the right people.
So you have forgiven.
I have now.
Right here.
Check this out.
More news.
I'm Tony DeCopa with CBS News.
More original reporting.
It puts everything in perspective.
We are on a mission with NASA.
Every morning on CBS This Morning.
We're going to begin with breaking news.
The biggest names in politics.
Whoa, that's news. Are we at a tipping point?
Face the questions you want answered.
Margo, that's a great question.
Good question.
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan.
New Hampshire has one of the highest numbers of opioid and drug-related deaths in the country, and that's made it a key focus on the campaign trail here. CBS News Chief Washington correspondent Major Garrett spoke to one family feeling the effects over multiple generations.
Paula Wilson is 64 years old and a recovering opioid addict who has also struggled with alcoholism. She's the cleanest family member to raise 16-year-old Devin, her grandson.
He's a high-risk kid because of a number of factors. You know, his early childhood experiences, the family history.
Devin, at times reluctantly, has lived with Paula for 8 years.
I don't really think of my past at all, so I kind of just ignore it.
The toll on the Wilson family, almost unimaginable.
Both my husbands were heroin addicts. 3 of my children have been multi-drug use, but primarily opioids have been their drug of choice.
That's a lot for one family.
It is a lot. It's a large family, and the cycle of addiction is strong.
And repetitive.
So we're en route to a report of a 55-year-old female who's overdosed.
Manchester, New Hampshire District Fire Chief Mike Gamache.
We see some of the same people all the time.
Last week in Manchester, firefighters found this woman unconscious on a sidewalk before she came to. They suspect she overdosed on opioids.
It seems like the opioid epidemic is sticking around.
New Hampshire is among the top 5 states for opioid-involved deaths. Its mortality rate is more than twice the national average.
New Hampshire has been particularly hard hit.
Democratic candidates field questions about opioids at almost every stop.
And the time has come to recognize that addiction is a medical issue.
When these pharmaceutical executives know that they are pushing a drug that hurts people and they keep pushing it, they are personally responsible. They can be held criminally responsible.
Several have highlighted the issue at rehab facilities. Research shows the number of children across the country in foster care due to parental drug use has more than doubled in the past 20 years, something experts have linked in part to the opioid epidemic.
We're raising a nation of parentless children directly related to the opioid crisis. The biggest loss is that grandchild relationship. It's something to grieve over.
You've got to be the heavy.
I am the heavy. You know, I am. I'm the parent.
Devin swims and runs track. He likes hanging with athletes and says he's seen enough of addiction.
I don't know. I don't fear anything.
Nothing?
Not about my future at all, no. I'm not scared at all.
For more, let's bring in Dante Scala and Trent Spinner. Dante is a political science professor at the University of New Hampshire. Trent is a reporter for Politico covering New Hampshire politics. Dante, I want to start with you. We just saw how heartbreakingly devastating this opioid crisis has been in the state of New Hampshire. How big of an issue is this, opioids and drug-related deaths?
It's been consistently now for years the number one issue that concerns locally, the residents of New Hampshire, higher than education, higher than taxes, higher than anything.
Number one.
Number one. And it's striking, though, in terms of presidential campaigns. 4 years ago, when Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump were running, I think it was a shock, like nationally. It became a national story because it was being covered here with presidential candidates. Now, as your piece mentions, it's kind of become part of the routine that candidates will go to a treatment center because the problem has not gone away.
Really shocking sort of sign of the times. Trent, so Amy Klobuchar got very deeply personal when talking about her own family experience with addiction. This was last night at an event. Let's go ahead and listen to some of that.
One of the things about my life is resiliency. I didn't have a perfect life. A lot of people in this room didn't have a perfect life. But my dad's struggle with alcoholism taught me something even deeper than the need for treatment and the help that he got that I want to make sure that others get. It also taught me that you just can't see things in the extremes. I couldn't. I had to see in the middle. I had to see in the gray area because otherwise I couldn't love my dad because he was messing up a lot.
So, I wonder, Trent, you hear that? And she went on to talk about how not seeing the extremes is, in her view, an asset. And that if you want someone who's not going to just look at extremes, she's the candidate for you. Is that kind of approach likely to resonate here with New Hampshire voters?
It is, and I just want to go back to that video that you played with Major Garrett. They were showing video of a woman who was overdosing.
Yes.
And that was actually across the street from where I used to work. And so
really?
I know the exact spot, and it was always a problem there.
It's a very real thing.
It's a very real thing. Yeah. It's a very popular, that was actually on the side of a very popular grocery store. So, I mean, this is an example of how it truly happens everywhere. That's how big of an issue it is.
Right, it's not just confined to one part of town.
No, right, and not just one type of not one group of people. It's really all socioeconomic groups in New Hampshire. To your question about Amy Klobuchar, this is something that she brings up every single stump speech.
Yeah, I'm going to actually, I think we're having some issues with your mic. Trent, we're going to try and fix that. But in the meantime, Dante, let me turn to you. To Trent's point, how pervasive, he brings up the fact that piece of video that was in Major's piece was just across the street from a place that he used to work. It's not confined to just one demographic, not just confined to one geographic area here in New Hampshire.
Certainly. It's a statewide problem which government is trying to address. I mean, certainly you see a lot of it in a city like Manchester, but the state has been grappling with ways to try to solve the problem. And it's striking with Klobuchar. Sometimes the final weekend before New Hampshire, candidates who have been working so hard kind of have this kind of like raw emotion bubbles to the surface when they're trying to connect with voters. We saw that with Hillary Clinton back in 2008 when she was talking about how difficult it was to run as a woman, and we see it now with kind of Amy Klobuchar. It's like everything kind of comes to a head that last weekend.
Right, a bit more reflection perhaps as they enter that final stretch. Dante, what are some of the other issues that you're going to be watching particularly closely tonight?
I think we've seen health care and climate change be at the top of the issue agenda again and again in polls, not so much locally, but in terms of a national issue. And I think especially for younger voters, climate change is especially important. But what's lacking is foreign policy. 4 years ago, we were focused on terrorist attacks in Paris and California. This time around, despite conflict with Iran and so forth, that's definitely been a back burner issue for New Hampshire Democrats, voters as well as candidates.
Yeah, I wonder, Trent, I think we've got your mic fixed now. Is that what you've been hearing? You've been out talking to New Hampshire voters. What are they prioritizing in terms of issues?
I was looking at your exit polls earlier that had the climate change is number 2 and healthcare is number 1. And I kind of see that as flip-flop when I'm out there talking to voters, and especially when they're taking questions on town halls. It seems like the number 1 question that people are asking is about climate change and what candidates are going to do about it, to the point where a lot of crowds are clapping or applauding when somebody asks that question, followed by healthcare. Candidates are really pushing the healthcare issue. They are they're asking people to introduce themselves who have gone through some really serious healthcare issues and maybe don't have insurance coverage to kind of tell their personal story. Finally, speaking of Iran, maybe I've heard in the last month 1 question about it.
Really? Even given what's happened in the news on the foreign policy front.
Right, yeah. I mean, it just doesn't seem to be popping for New Hampshire voters, at least.
Interesting. So, Dante, you have vast experience covering New Hampshire politics. Do the politics and issues here traditionally serve as a kind of litmus test for what we might see in the rest of the country here moving forward?
Occasionally an issue pops up here that we, like the opioid crisis, that does resonate going forth. And New Hampshire Democrats are much more like national Democrats, at least, certainly white Democrats. I think we will hear a different set of issues once we hit Nevada and South Carolina. But Iowa Democrats and New Hampshire Democrats have much more in common than, say, Iowa Republicans and New Hampshire Republicans.
Yeah. Trent, I want to ask you about turnout because, there are all kinds of predictions about what we might see. What if turnout actually doesn't hit what the expectations are and they're actually below what we were expecting to see? What will that say about the electorate?
Right. So the New Hampshire Secretary of State thinks about 240, or maybe it was 290, 290, right?
Yeah.
290,000 people Democrats will vote, which is a decent, healthy number. And some of the things I'll be looking for is turnout in the college towns like Durham, where UNH is, Plymouth State, Keene, because I think that'll help Bernie Sanders and Andrew Yang, who kind of are looking for that type of audience. And if turnout there is low, I think that'll be a challenge. I think if turnout is low in places like Manchester, where we are right now, or Nashua, where there is a lot of blue-collar workers, I think that could be a struggle for Joe Biden, though maybe he's got his own struggles at this point.
Yeah.
And then I'm looking at a couple of towns that voted for Barack Obama in 2008 and 2012 and then switched to President Trump. Towns like that have been a focus of Senator Klobuchar and Mayor Pete Buttigieg. And so I think if turnout is high in those areas, that could help them.
All right, a lot to watch. Dante Scala and Trent Spinner, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Coming up after a break, Michael Bloomberg is not on the ballot in New Hampshire, but he's still making news after someone leaked audio of him defending a controversial stop and frisk policy. We'll talk with his national spokesperson next. You're streaming Red and Blue live from Manchester.
During the day today, some people thought this might be like the Super Bowl. They thought that we might fall a yard short. But let me tell you, this Tennessean is in the end zone and it feels great. Thanks to you.
You can watch CBSN 24/7.
We've got an amazing story to share with you.
Let's talk about the latest developments. There's so many levels to this. We have a CBS News exclusive.
Fires in California. What happens next and how does it all play out?
We are on a mission with NASA.
I understand you have some breaking news. It's not over yet, is the bottom line.
This is a massive operation.
It's quite an adventure here at CBSN.
It's been a day. Wow. That's not normal.
Our nation's capital, decisions are made here that affect all of us. And today, more than ever, people want truth, understanding, and accountability. So join us every evening as we bring you CBS News original reporting from around the world, while keeping our eye on what's going on right here in Washington.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell. Now from Washington, D.C. Understanding the world begins with the right questions.
Do you trust Kim Jong-un?
Doesn't the blame reside with Jewel? Is it now our top terrorist threat?
With the right people.
So you have forgiven?
I have now.
Right here.
Check this out.
More news.
I'm Tony DeCoppel with CBS News.
More original reporting.
It puts everything in perspective.
We are on a mission with NASA.
Every morning on CBS This Morning.
We're going to begin with breaking news.
The biggest names in politics.
Whoa, that's news. It seems Iran's behavior is getting worse, not better. Are we at a tipping point where those decisions, do you think that the investigation is in peril?
Face the questions you want answered.
Margo, that's a great question.
Good question. I do not know how to answer your question.
The president this morning tweeted something that I'd like you to clarify.
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan.
One candidate not publicly focused on New Hampshire is Michael Bloomberg. Despite not being on the ballot there, he did pull out an early win in the state. He received the popular vote in the town of Dixville Notch, where only 5 ballots were cast. However, the former New York mayor is spending Tuesday elsewhere. He is now facing scrutiny for a newly surfaced recording. In it, Bloomberg defends the controversial policing policy of stop and frisk. He can be heard saying, quote, "You can take the description of male minorities 16 to 25 and, quote, Xerox it and pass it out to all the cops." He later adds, police are put in minority neighborhoods because, quote, "that's where all the crime is." These comments were made during a 2015 speech at the Aspen Institute. President Trump took to Twitter Tuesday accusing Bloomberg of being a racist. The comments were later deleted. Here's what he had to say about that earlier.
But I looked at it and I watched him pander at a church and practically beg for forgiveness. I wouldn't have begged for forgiveness. I mean, he was doing his job at the time. And then when he went up to the church, I thought it was disgraceful. But I put something out and it was pretty nasty. And I thought, I'm looking to bring the country together, not divide the country further. But when he went up to a church and he apologized for everything he's ever done, that was only for getting votes. And I think probably people understand that.
Sabrina Singh is the national spokesperson for the Bloomberg campaign, and she joins me now. Hi, Sabrina.
Hi.
So we do know representatives from the Bloomberg campaign knew about this tape and had asked for it to be blocked from coming out. How is the campaign now responding?
Well, I actually don't know about that being blocked. It was 2015. I was not there at the time. But the way we're responding is this. We know Mike Bloomberg's record. He is certainly not a racist. And I think it's pretty wild that the president took to Twitter to promote lies and fearmonger, because that's certainly not the case. Mike has certainly apologized for his remarks. He did not, at the time, understand the impact stop and frisk had on Black and brown communities. And I think that's the real true test of a leader. Can you apologize and learn from your mistakes? And I think that's what we are doing. That's what Mike is committed to doing. And today, we actually had a previously scheduled meeting with over 20 faith leaders, African-American faith leaders in the community, who came out and put out a statement saying, Trump's lies are only stoking more hate. We know that Mike is not a racist. We know that these policies were bad ones, but he's apologized for them.
And so he is saying that his thinking has evolved since 2015.
Absolutely. His thinking has totally evolved, and I think he has certainly come a long way. And, that is a true test of a leader. Can you recognize your mistakes and apologize for them, go into that community, ask for their forgiveness, but then look to build on those mistakes and repair the damage that has been done? And one of the things that we've put out is our Greenwood initiative that would close the income racial wealth gap with Black Americans. And something else that he put forward when he was mayor is the Young Men's Initiative that actually President Obama built on with My Brother's Keeper. So Mike is really invested in this community. This is someone who's been a true leader within this community, and I think someone that can really unite the country, and that's really what we need right now.
Right, and of course the campaign is going to be focused on the positive, but is the campaign concerned that this stop and frisk will come up and haunt it as we get closer and closer to the election?
I think it's very fair that every candidate's record should be scrutinized. And I think what's great about Mike is he has done incredible things for the city of New York. He grew the economy. He implemented incredible climate change initiatives here, took on the NRA. So while they are scrutinizing his record, I think you also have to look at the positives that he did. And some of the things that, I think his resume certainly stacks up much higher than some of the other candidates in this race. So I think it's going to be a mix. But at the end of the day, all candidates' records should be scrutinized, from Donald Trump to the Democratic field.
Of course, it's a very special Tuesday night in New Hampshire. We know the candidates are watching very closely. How about Mike Bloomberg? Is he also watching the results in New Hampshire closely?
We're definitely going to be watching tonight. Excited to see sort of who makes it out. I think after Iowa last week, that was pretty tough for the Democratic Party to see. And so New Hampshire is a new fresh start. And so we're excited. But, as you know, Mike is not on the ballot there.
Right.
And that was very intentional. We are focused on the Super Tuesday states and beyond. We are focused on the states that are going to lead us to victory in November, that will help us, beat Donald Trump. And those are the states like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, California, Texas, huge delegate states. So we feel really good about our chances come Super Tuesday.
Now, I want to talk about the Nevada debate because, as you know, Mike Bloomberg hasn't been able to make any of the previous debates because of the donor threshold, and he doesn't receive any donations for his campaign. That was since taken away for the Nevada debate. Do you anticipate that Mike Bloomberg will be on the stage for that debate?
You know, we hit our third qualifying poll today with the release of the Monmouth poll, and he's climbing at third. And the Quinnipiac poll from, I think, earlier this week, he was at second. So I feel good. I can't predict if there are going to be more national polls, but I certainly hope that he will make the Nevada debate stage. It's an opportunity for millions of Americans to tune in to see his voice on the stage for the first time and really see what he brings that other candidates don't.
So he does want to debate, right? Because some pundits wondered whether he actually wanted to be on the debate stage. He does want to be there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's an opportunity for all Americans to see who you are, what your values are, where you stack up against the other candidates, and what you bring to the table. So we certainly are welcoming this debate, but, you know, Mike was never going to take any campaign contribution. He said that from day one. And so now that the donor threshold is no longer a factor when it comes to the DNC debates, we're looking forward to hopefully qualifying soon.
All right. And Sabrina, you know that Senator Bernie Sanders, who makes no secret of how he feels about billionaires, has been hitting Bloomberg rather hard on his campaign trail recently. Let's play a little bit of what he said recently.
Then we have a former mayor of New York. I won't mention his name. Now, I have no objection. You know, he's a nice guy and he has his views. And he's more than entitled to his views, and he's more than entitled to run for president or anything else he wants to run for. But what, in my view, he is not entitled to is to buy an election.
So, Sabrina, how is the campaign handling this sort of criticism that what Bloomberg is trying to do is just outright buy an election, something that's never been done in American history?
Right. Well, that's a ridiculous premise that the Sanders campaign certainly is trying to promote. Americans cannot be bought. And I think it's insulting to a voter out there saying that their vote can be bought by someone. At the end of the day, the American people are going to decide who they think is best. And we hope that it's Michael Bloomberg. And we are getting out there and communicating our message, whether it's, you know, on the TV waves or the radio airwaves. But we got into this race late. I mean, he got in November 21st. So we have a lot of time to make up right now and a lot of catching up to do to the other candidates to make sure that people know who he is.
And the campaign, you feel good? The campaign feels good about where Bloomberg is right now?
We do. We feel like we have the momentum, with the kind of the wind in our sails right now. I think, you know, the polls are showing we're climbing and we're increasing. And in one of the polls, we're leading Biden right now. So we feel really confident. But that will be tested on Super Tuesday. So it will be exciting to see.
Well, I'll be watching. Well, Sabrina's thing. Thank you so much for coming to see us. We appreciate it. We're going to take a quick break, but we will be covering the entire New Hampshire primary all night long, so stick with us. More on that when we come back. You're streaming Red and Blue.
It's not just about what I will do as president. It is also about what you, the people who love this country, the citizens of the United States of America, can do to change it. That's what this election is all about.
Good morning to you and welcome to CBS This Morning.
Understanding the world.
We're going to begin with breaking news.
Begins with the right questions.
Have police discovered a motive? Does the president have a red line here?
What can voters expect to see today?
Join Gayle King, Anthony Mason, and Tony DeCopel on CBS This Morning.
We know a little more this morning. This is a major development.
This is a very serious situation.
More news every morning on the show everyone is talking about.
We have much more news ahead for you.
CBS This Morning.
Where are you from?
Venezuela.
And you traveled the whole way with your son?
Sola.
Sí, sola.
Tenía amenaza.
¿Dónde está?
¿Estamos dónde?
En Estados Unidos. The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell.
Our nation's capital, decisions are made here that affect all of us. And today, more than ever, people want truth, understanding, and accountability. So join us every evening as we bring you CBS News original reporting from around the world while keeping our eye on what's going on right here in Washington.
The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell. Now from Washington, D.C.
You can watch CBSN 24/7.
We've got an amazing story to share with you.
Let's talk about the latest developments. There's so many levels to this.
We have a CBS News exclusive.
Fires in California. What happens next and how does it all play out?
We are on a mission with NASA.
I understand you have some breaking news. It's not over yet, is the bottom line.
This is a massive operation.
It's quite an adventure here at CBSN.
It's been a day.
You can see the desperation in the journey simply by looking at the trail that's left behind.
So she says she's 17. She looks kind of like she's 12.
Said to me, you know, if you tried to do this in New York City, take a picture of a man, he'd break your camera.
There's something very, very uncomfortable about this.
Today, the white supremacist lens.
This area can be the new Silicon Valley.
There was not a cot in the warehouse, not one cot in the warehouse.
We're so far deep at this point that there's no turning back. This is a long road ahead.
Our nation's capital, decisions are made here that affect all of us. And today, more than ever, people want truth, understanding, and accountability. So join us every evening as we bring you CBS News original reporting from around the world while keeping our eye on what's going on right here in Washington.
The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell. Now from Washington, D.C. Understanding the world begins with the right questions.
Do you trust Kim Jong-un?
Doesn't the blame reside with Jewel? Is it now our top terrorist threat?
With the right people.
So you have forgiven?
I have now.
Right here.
Check this out.
More news.
I'm Tony DeCoppel with CBS News.
More original reporting.
It puts everything in perspective.
We are on a mission with NASA.
Every morning on CBS This Morning.
We're going to begin with breaking news.
Wow. That's not normal.
The biggest names in politics.
Whoa, that's news. Are we at a tipping point?
Face the questions you want answered.
Margo, that's a great question.
Good question.
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan.
Our nation's capital, decisions are made here that affect all of us. So join us every evening as we bring you CBS News original reporting from around the world while keeping our eye on what's going on right here in Washington.
Experience thought-provoking, innovative, and truly original reporting.
Stand back.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
Join Gail, Anthony, and Tony every morning on CBS This Morning.
It's not a caucus, it's a regular primary, so it'll be fine.
I'm hoping there'll be some clarity after the New Hampshire primary going for the rest of the country.
I just feel like I just connected with Joe, and he said all the things I wanted to hear. He has the experience.
Joe's had his day. I think he's been, great for the country, but it's time to move on. It's time for a new generation of leadership. And that's why I think Joe is slipping in the polls as Pete is rising in the polls.
I'm voting for Pete Buttigieg. I feel like he's got the most unifying message, and actually working on this campaign has made me a better person.
I'm trying to find a candidate that represents, immigrants and people with disabilities. So somebody that could represent more this underrepresented population.
How high on your priority list is it to find a candidate who can defeat Donald Trump? Oh, very high. Very, very high. I just really want to beat Donald Trump.
That's your top priority?
It's my top priority because nothing else is going to get done if we don't do that.
Everyone, I'm Elaine Quijano, live from the Bonfire Country Bar in Manchester, New Hampshire. We will be here all night long, streaming the results as they come in. So here's something I don't get to say often. Come down for a drink and join our team of political correspondents and analysts as we break down everything you need to know. In just under an hour, all polls will be closed in the New Hampshire primary. That's when we could begin to see some results. Our Ed O'Keefe reports as the final votes are being cast.
O'Keefe, we've got this!
Former Mayor Pete Buttigieg made a last-minute attempt to find voters this morning.
We pull off a big success, and it feels like it's shaping up well.
He's hoping to defeat the more progressive Senator Bernie Sanders, who's trying to be the first non-president to win back-to-back primaries here.
We have an agenda that speaks to the needs of working families all across this country.
In the last week, nobody has climbed faster than Senator Amy Klobuchar.
It is here that many candidates that are not as well known or maybe don't have the biggest bank account find their footing in the state of New Hampshire.
Klobuchar is hoping that undecided voters give her another look before casting a ballot. She had a breakout performance at last week's debate, and based on exit polls, almost half of voters said the debate was an important factor in their decision. Ed O'Keefe, CBS News, Manchester, New Hampshire.
Today, former Vice President Joe Biden revealed he would not be in New Hampshire tonight. Instead, he will be heading to South Carolina. Our Nicole Killian reports on what this could mean for his campaign.
We can fight for every vote we have here.
Former Vice President Joe Biden said he was after every vote, but left New Hampshire before they were even counted.
Going to South Carolina tonight.
Biden's poll numbers in New Hampshire have plummeted, and the campaign sees the primary in South Carolina, where he's more popular, as an opportunity to rebound. But there are more danger signs for Biden. The latest national poll shows he's dropped 9 points and now has former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg close on his heels. But Bloomberg is under fire tonight after a 2015 speech surfaced where he defends his controversial stop-and-frisk policy and explained why cops are put in minority neighborhoods.
But that's where all the crime is. And the way you get the guns out of the kids' hands is to throw them against the wall and frisk them.
Bloomberg has apologized for the policy and did so again today.
I apologize. I own it.
Another candidate fighting for survival, Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren, who has seen some of her support slip against candidates like Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg, who is rallying here tonight. Elaine?
Nicole, thank you very much. I want to bring in Ed O'Keefe and Caitlin Conan. Ed is a CBS News political correspondent, and Caitlin is our CBS News political director. Welcome to both of you. Ed, let me start with you. We are getting closer to the polls closing. What are you going to be watching for if and when we see results later tonight?
We'll be watching especially to see how people who don't like Bernie Sanders sort of broke up their votes. Did they favor Mayor Buttigieg? Did they favor Senator Klobuchar? How much support did Senator Warren and Vice President Biden get? Did someone like Andrew Yang or Tulsi Gabbard perhaps get those kind of liberal voters who were looking for a renegade candidate but maybe didn't want to back Bernie Sanders? And how much of the youth vote shows up tonight? Those between the ages of essentially 18 and 30. Was Sanders able to convince them to come off the campuses of Dartmouth and Keene State and here at Southern New Hampshire University, Franklin Pierce University, and turn out to vote? If they did, and if turnout is as large as expected, it's likely a good night for him and potentially also for Mayor Buttigieg, especially, who has made a big appeal to Republicans, to independents who might be willing to show up today, change their registration in the case of the Republicans, or in the case of the independents, just show up and play ball.
And Caitlin, as you know, New Hampshire is an open primary, and our exit polling shows right now that 45% of voters today call themselves independent. 53% say that they are Democrats. What does that say about the state of the race?
So basically what we saw today is that a lot of people went in with an open mind, and we saw from our exit polls, or early exit polls, that people made up their mind within the past couple days. So what I'm going to be watching is how does this play out between the battle for the progressive wing of the party and the more moderate wing of the party, because we saw about 40% of people said that they want to go back to more the Obama-era policies, but then 38% said they want more big change and reform. So as we move forward, which one of those two wins out?
Right, that really seems to be one of the major storylines that's evolving here. So Ed, Joe Biden is one of the more moderate candidates. A lot of the talk today has been about how he's headed to South Carolina. What is the campaign saying about that move?
Well, he has been saying since he spoke with CBS This Morning yesterday that he believes now that this race really won't be decided until voters in more diverse states actually get to weigh in. 1.3 million people here in New Hampshire, a little over 3 million in Iowa, predominantly white and rural states. When you have Nevada and South Carolina on the ballot next, which of course have larger Latino, Asian, and African American populations, Biden believes he'll find better appeal there. But a bad finish here tonight could spell big trouble for him in those states. There have been some surveys just in the last few days that show his lead, especially among black voters, is been cut in half in some cases, as Bernie Sanders, Tom Steyer, and Mike Bloomberg have all found favor with some of those voters. You are sitting next to someone, though, Elaine, who I think we should point out is uniquely qualified to talk about this, and we should ask her because she's been involved in these kinds of things in the past, and this is an important strategic and budgetary decision that a lot of these campaigns have to make.
You're absolutely right, Ed. I mean, so the idea that difficult choices have to be made at particular junctures, this would seem to be one of those junctures for Joe Biden's campaign.
And basically, you go into these things and you want to come out with momentum, and you might have every intention of staying in till as long as you can, but at the end of the day, it's about money. So I think after tonight, some of these candidates are going to have some tough choices to make. And also, when it comes to diversity and voters of color, I think if someone like an Amy Klobuchar or a Mayor Pete Buttigieg comes out of here with momentum, there might be voters down the road in some of these later states who give them a second look. And meanwhile, Mike Bloomberg is waiting in the wings and all the Super Tuesday states.
Right, spending his money.
Exactly.
So for viewers who may not know your background, if you could just give us a little bit of a sense, because take us inside what it is like when you are a campaign at a stage like this, where, you know, Iowa's done. Now you're in New Hampshire. You're looking ahead to Nevada and South Carolina.
Well, it's all about money, and it's all about resources and being able to book a ticket to the next place and pay your
That's what it's
staff.
about.
Exactly.
Making it to the next route.
Exactly. You've got to make it to the next route. And I've worked for campaigns in the past where I had bosses look me in the eye and say we were going to be in it the next day, and then I woke up and didn't have a job.
Right. So that's the reality.
Exactly. So you never really know. And I think that's something that we have to keep in mind here is, you know, these are all people who are working for folks that they believe in, and they think they're going to be in it till the end, but sometimes, you know, the news and the moment and the votes just get in the way of the best laid plans.
Right. I mean, a very human sort of dimension to all of these decisions that are being made.
And I was thinking, you know, a lot of these voters said that they made up their mind after the debate. And in 2016...
What do you think about that?
Yeah, so it could be good news for Amy Klobuchar. And I was thinking about it from the perspective of the Republicans in 2016, who here in New Hampshire, Marco Rubio had a really bad debate in New Hampshire, and he kept repeating the same lines over and over, and that really affected him. And he came out of Iowa with a lot of momentum, and after New Hampshire, he was down, I think, 5th place, and went on to South Carolina, but at the end of the day, he had to drop out not shortly thereafter.
Right, because these are the moments that are really shaping these voters' perceptions at this point. I want to ask you about gender, Caitlin. Our exit polling shows right now that 58% of voters say if the nominee is a woman, it will make a difference. It will make a difference in beating President Trump. 30% say it will be more difficult. What are you watching for from Senators Warren and Klobuchar tonight? So, no difference is what I meant to say. No difference, yeah.
No 58%. Yeah, so basically I think we're going to see it all comes down to electability is the key question here. Right. And I think that means different things to different people and to voters. And so we're going to see if people think that they are the person who can take on Trump, because that is the #1 issue we're hearing from voters is they just want someone at the end of the day who can beat Donald Trump when it comes to the Democratic primary.
Is this a difficult issue, though, to really kind of get at the heart of it? Because, you know, no one wants to be be kind of called a sexist. But it's interesting with this dynamic now where you have, as our Caitlin Huey-Burns has found time and time again, talking to voters, they're really assessing based on what they think their neighbor or their friends or, their family members might find acceptable.
Right, and everybody plays analyst these days.
Right.
Instead of going with their gut, I feel like when Caitlin's talked to voters or Ed or embeds on the campaign trail, hear from voters, they're always saying, well, this person might win here, so I don't really want to support them because my neighbor doesn't like them. And it's very hard to get into the nitty-gritty of it because at the end of the day, it's, are you not supporting this person because you don't think they can win or because other people don't think they can?
And Ed, you have been out there on the trail. I wonder what impact you think could the winner of tonight's primary in New Hampshire have on the sort of overall trajectory here on the Democratic side?
Oh, look, if we come out of this and essentially Buttigieg won Iowa, Sanders has won New Hampshire, or Buttigieg wins both, there's no denying that they are now indisputably front runners and everyone else is riding along in their wake. And I think the next big turning point here in terms of the entire field is what happens on Super Tuesday, March 3rd, when Mike Bloomberg finally appears on a ballot and isn't just getting written in by apparently some New Hampshire Democrats today, if you saw the results up in Dixville Notch, but actually is spending money to appear on the ballot and is facing off against the rest of this field, as will now sort of begin tomorrow as they start campaigning in places like North Carolina and California, in addition to Nevada and South Carolina. And I'll also be watching to see how these numbers here tonight begin to affect the erosion, especially for Joe Biden, not as much in Nevada, but in South Carolina. He had a 45-point lead at different points over the last several months in our Battleground Tracker surveys and in others. That lead in the last week appears to have been cut at least in half at the fortunes of Bernard Sanders and Michael Bloomberg. If that keeps up, it could really be game over for him come South Carolina primary night, because if you can't make it happen there, after now basically saying, I'm going to win in states that have larger minority populations, the case for Biden will be over.
And Ed, I wonder for undecided voters. Actually, let's go to this CBS News exit poll data. The age of primary voters here in the New Hampshire Democratic primary, Caitlin, as we look at these numbers here, 11% ages 18 to 29, 20% 30 to 44, 36% 45 to 64, and 33% 65 and over. What is your sense? What does that tell us about the kind of folks who decided to turn out tonight?
So I think we'll see at the end of this if more young voters turn out. And if young voters turn out, that's probably a good thing for Senator Sanders. But if it skews older, that could be a good thing for Mayor Pete Buttigieg and some of the more moderate voters who tend to skew older in terms of their support.
Yeah. Ed, on this question of undecided voters, I'm curious, based on the conversations that you've had, not just with voters here in New Hampshire, but in other parts of the country as well, is it clear what kind of issues might sway those people who are still undecided at this point?
It's primarily figuring out, Elaine, which of these contenders could defeat the president. If you're a Bernie Sanders supporter, you believe he can do it, and you believe that everything he does needs to be implemented yesterday. But if you're anyone else who hasn't picked a candidate, top of mind in every conversation we've had with them is, who is it that could defeat the president? That, I believe, is why we're starting to see many voters start to take a more serious look at Mike Bloomberg, because they're realizing he's got the money, he says he's willing to spend it, he's saying things about the president that they believe to be true and effective. And they're starting to see, of course, the slippage of people like Senator Elizabeth Warren and former Vice President Biden. The fact that Klobuchar will have seen a bounce, we believe, here tonight, now raises the question of, well, is she the woman, potentially, from the Midwest, a moderate who has good working relationships with Republicans, but has virtually no support among minority voters, the one who could potentially lead the party against the president? We'll have to wait and see. But she now probably faces greater scrutiny over that question, as does, of course, Mayor Buttigieg going into Nevada, where Latinos and Asians especially will play a larger role, and then, of course, to South Carolina, where black voters.
And Caitlin, CBS News, of course, will also be tracking the delegate count tonight. Remind us why that is so significant, because after all, this is a hunt for delegates.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And there's no winner-take-all states here. Yeah. So you can get a second or third and still go on and rack up delegates to make it to convention and get the nomination. But to Ed's point earlier, when people say they want someone who can defeat Trump, winning and placing well does matter, because if you get fourth or fifth, Third, even if you get enough delegates to maybe continue on towards that pathway, voters might look at you and say, how can you take on the president if you can't win somewhere and actually emphatically defeat your competitors in a primary state? Why should we trust that you're the person who says they can beat Donald Trump?
Yeah. So before I let both of you go, let me just get your thoughts, starting with you, Caitlin. What are you going to be watching for, sort of one or two things you're going to be watching for tonight?
So I'll be watching to see how Joe Biden does and see potentially how this will affect his standing with black voters in South Carolina and beyond. And then also be watching for Michael Bloomberg and see where he plays into this race. As Ed mentioned, he's saying with a ton of money. He's got an aggressive travel schedule. He appears to be getting under the president's skin. The president keeps tweeting about him.
The president keeps directing some tweets as his way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they got into back and forth over race today, and that's an issue. No Democrat is going to be able to win without the support of black voters. And that is something that is very real, and people are going to face scrutiny over their record for that. And so I'll be watching how he continues to pivot and message his record with stop and frisk.
Ed, what about you? What are you watching for tonight?
Elaine, I'm watching the fight for fifth place. And who gets it, and how does that potentially begin to compel or force them out of the contest? If it's Elizabeth Warren, her campaign argues, no, we're fighting on. They put out a very detailed 2,000-word memo this afternoon making the argument that when it comes to the delegate race, they're going to be just fine, thank you, because Mayor Buttigieg continues to poll behind Warren in national surveys of Democrats in 48 other states. If it's Biden, again, as we've been discussing, how does he afford to stay in for the next 18 days before South Carolina? And how does he salvage his support among African-American voters in South Carolina, especially among Latino voters in Nevada, and try to convince them to ignore what's already happened in Iowa and New Hampshire, the two states that traditionally propel somebody off to the nomination?
All right, Ed O'Keefe and Caitlin Conan, thank you both very much. Great to see both of you. Still to come, New Hampshire has a huge stock of independent voters, and many who voted today only recently made a decision about who to back. Ahead, we'll hear some people explain why they're struggling to pick a presidential candidate. You're streaming Red and Blue live from the Bonfire Country Bar in Manchester.
You got to go with your gut and what you want, not what you settle for something that's a compromise.
A number of our candidates right now can out-debate Trump because, like I said, they're going to go up there and they're going to speak to the issues of Americans. Americans are tired of being told what to fear.
When I found a candidate that I really thought had that message, it just, Pete resonated with me.
You can watch CBSN 24/7.
We've got an amazing story to share with you.
Let's talk about the latest developments. There's so many levels to this.
We have a CBS News exclusive.
Fires in California. What happens next, and how does it all play out?
We are on a mission with NASA.
I understand you have some breaking news. It's not over yet, is the bottom line.
This is a massive operation.
It's quite an adventure here at CBSN.
It's been a day. Wow. That's not normal.
Our nation's capital, decisions are made here that affect all of us. And today, more than ever, people want truth, understanding, and accountability. So join us every evening as we bring you CBS News original reporting from around the world, while keeping our eye on what's going on right here in Washington.
The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell, now from Washington, D.C. Understanding the world begins with the right questions.
Do you trust Kim Jong-un?
Doesn't the blame reside with Jewel? Is it now our top terrorist threat?
With the right people.
So you have forgiven? I have now.
Right here.
Check this out.
More news.
I'm Tony DeCoppel with CBS News.
More original reporting.
It puts everything in perspective.
We are on a mission with NASA.
Every morning on CBS This Morning.
We're going to begin with breaking news.
The biggest names in politics.
Whoa, that's news. It seems Iran's behavior is getting worse, not better. Are we at a tipping point where those decisions, do you think that the investigation is in peril?
Face the questions you want answered.
Margo, it's a great question.
Good question. I do not know how to answer your question.
The president this morning tweeted something that I'd like you to clarify.
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan.
In New Hampshire, more than 42% of voters in the state are registered as undeclared. On Monday, the top Democratic hopefuls made their final efforts to appeal to those undecided voters in the Granite State. President Trump also hosted a campaign rally in Manchester last night in an effort to rally Republicans. CBS News this morning, co-host Tony Dokoupil sat down with some voters there to talk about the candidates and the key issues that matter to them.
On a winter day in New Hampshire, there aren't too many places to go looking for voters. But over an ice fishing hole in Concord is one of them.
How many maggots do you put on a hook to catch a fish?
I'm going to put 3 on right now.
And that's where we met Dennis Witcher and Tim Moore.
You're a hunting guy primarily, you're a fishing guy.
Mm-hmm.
You're a Republican, you're a Democrat.
Yeah, sort of.
Sort of says it all when it comes to the New Hampshire primary, as many sort of Democrats review a field of candidates they only sort of like.
I'm struggling with the presidential race this year.
What's the struggle over?
The division in this country is probably the biggest issue that I have right now. It's just heartbreaking.
Whoa.
Little fish here.
Whoa.
Little guy.
Up here, we found reeling in fish can be easier than reeling in votes.
Healthcare is one of your top issues.
Yeah, I'm self-employed, so it's expensive. It's very expensive.
Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders seem to have Medicare for all plans, right?
Yep.
Free at the point of service. Sounds pretty good, no?
Well, how are we going to pay for it?
Another major campaign topic felt unavoidable.
This is 40 degrees. I got my coat open, but it's not supposed to be this hot.
No.
No, it's global warming. Climate
you say
change.
that with a smile. What do you think? You don't really believe it, do
It's
you?
a joke. You got to be kidding me.
Tim, are you with Dennis on that point?
No.
I didn't think so. So your biggest issues are, in order, political polarization.
Healthcare.
Healthcare.
Healthcare and climate. I mean...
You mean the hoax that your friend here says is not affecting your business?
Not just climate change. I mean, the Trump administration is rolling back protections on our water at a staggering rate.
As Moore considers who might be able to help him, Witcher has his own mixed feelings about the person now in charge, President Trump.
What do you think of his character?
That's a tough call.
As he gave it some thought.
Whoa, I got one.
There you go. Reel him in. It's Tony's fish. This could be dinner.
Oh, nice one. I'm not going to grab it with my bare hand like you.
Then, back to the topic at hand.
I think on a personal level, he has a good character. But his public appearance, it's pretty crude.
Do you think he's always honest?
I think he's an honest person, but he sure does tell a lot of lies.
For now, Witcher is willing to look past it all for one reason.
How do you think the economy's doing?
Oh, it's unbelievable. I think his trade policies, the tariffs, dealing with China has helped a lot, and he's managed to keep the farmers happy.
We decided to warm up in Manchester, where President Trump has even stronger support.
What's your favorite thing that he's gotten done?
Everything.
All of it? What about you? What stands out?
My kids' college funds. They've thrived.
Yeah?
Yeah, along with our 401s, my wife's, myself's.
But also much stronger opposition from primary voters like Deborah Tolles and Jessica Pomerello.
I really like Amy.
Amy Klobuchar.
Yeah, I do. But I'm not sure if she can beat Trump or not.
And an ability to beat Trump is a big qualification for you.
Anybody can beat Trump. I have to agree with you on that one, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
It's not that I don't like him.
Back on the pond, Witcher and Moore are as divided as anyone, but only politically.
So what advice do you have for the rest of the country to get along the way you two guys are?
Go fishing.
Yeah.
Makes life pretty easy.
Joining us now is Tom Rath. He is the former chairman of the New Hampshire Republican Party. Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
So President Trump visited Manchester last night ahead of today's primary, and I want to go ahead and play some sound from that event. Let's listen to that.
You have crossovers in primaries, don't you? So I hear a lot of Republicans tomorrow will vote for the weakest candidate possible of the Democrats. Does that make sense? You people wouldn't do that. My only problem is I'm trying to figure out who is their weakest candidate. I think they're all weak.
So what is your sense, Mr. Rath? Is there a feeling among Republicans that all of these Democratic candidates are weak, as the president says?
Well, if there is, then we're wrong, because whoever emerges from this field, and I think it's a talented field, is going to be a strong candidate in the general election against the president. And first of all, Republicans cannot vote for a Democrat. An independent can, but not a Republican. So that doesn't happen. But you should never expect a general election to feel like a primary, because you can't replicate exactly the context in which it's going to be run. And when whoever goes through this process and all these candidates and gets sorted out, by the end it's a pretty good candidate. And I think Republicans are in for a tough race.
So our polling shows that Democratic voters in New Hampshire are driven in large part by a desire to defeat the president come November. So does that drive make you worried about turnout in the general election?
Well, two things. One, I think this president and his character or lack thereof animates the entire race. And I've been doing this since 1964. I've never seen a race so dominated by a particular personality as this race. And either you love him or you don't love him, and there's not a lot in between. So I think it's driving both sides to it. I think at the end, things like the economy matter. I think things like where we are in the world. But I think more than anything else, this election is about character.
And what about the impeachment trial? What effect have you seen here in New Hampshire because of that?
Well, both our senators voted to convict, and they're both Democrats. And I think that probably isn't surprising to people. I have to confess that I was a Mitt Romney guy a long time ago, and I think Senator Romney appealed to a lot of New Hampshire people, Republican and Democrat, because he put character ahead of party, and I think that's a very important thing.
So you, when you watched his comments, I assume you saw his comments. What did you think?
Well, Senator Romney?
Senator Romney,
I'm a friend. I'm a supporter. I was proud of him. I think he said some things that America needs to say occasionally, and brought a sense of dignity. I'm not saying that the president should have been removed. But that somebody said, what drives me more than political considerations is my conscience. I think it's a very important point.
Turning back to tonight, what kinds of issues are New Hampshire voters most focused on, you think?
Well, the most important one is who can beat Trump. And we can kid around about all the others, but that's what matters. You're going to see in New Hampshire, which you don't see a lot of places, a very quick count. We're not going to be here all night. Once those machines close...
That's great news, Mr. Chairman.
I know.
The best news I've heard.
We count fast and we count accurately. We have mostly machines, and you're going to get a pretty good sense. And then other people, way smarter than I, are going to have to sift out who survives and who goes on. But really, what Democrats are doing in this race more than any I've ever seen, and independents, are saying who's the strongest candidate in the field against Donald Trump. That's a more political but character-driven question.
So, according to the CBS News Battleground Tracker poll, Bernie Sanders was in the lead with 29% of New Hampshire primary voters. Why do you think he's having so much success in the state?
I'm sorry?
Bernie Sanders was in the lead. According to our last Battleground Tracker
he has an incredibly loyal, committed group that speaks to what I would call the left side of the Democratic Party. And that is a significant portion. But if you look at the Democrats who get elected to office in this state, such as former Governor Lynch, both senators who are both also former governors, they tend to be more centrist, liberal on social concerns, but relatively thrifty and conservative on spending. Now, they all got elected by saying no income tax.
Yes. What about Senator Amy Klobuchar? So following last week's debate, she's seen a bit of a surge. How do you think that changes the landscape in this primary?
Well, I think in these races, the one who gets hot last gets hot best. And I think she had a great debate. I was doing some stuff that night, and I was surprised how good she was.
As a Republican, what did you see?
Well, as a Republican, she's tough to run against. She's very quick on her feet. She was very telling in what she did. And she has a sense of optimism that maybe others don't. And she also came across to me as somebody who wants to bring people together as opposed to divide. I think that's a good argument here. Whether she started soon enough, whether she can get back in this race, we'll see tonight. But she's had a very good last 4 days.
So what are you going to be keeping your eye on here as the votes come in tonight?
Well, I think it's where the vote comes from. The fact that you're going to get a big vote here, because this is by far, this is by far our most important, most precious political possession. And you're going to get very thoughtful votes. I think Sanders will win because he has he's retained a constituency from when he beat Clinton here. But his numbers will go down. He got close to 58 or 60%. My guess he's going to be in the high 20s. And really, it's going to be how it sorts out. We don't decide it. We cut the field and we give the rest of the country a framework to look at it. I think maybe one or two will not go on from here or will go on here in wounded. But I think the race is clearly going to be different tomorrow morning than it is right now.
All right, Tom Rath. Tom, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. Senator Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg are two candidates who were not among the favorites when the 2020 presidential race began, but they are now surging in New Hampshire, a state known for its surprises. CBS Evening News anchor and managing editor Norah O'Donnell spent part of the day with them as they made their final push in the Granite State.
You got your parka on?
I do.
Meanwhile, I have no jacket on because that's my thing.
Amy Klobuchar may not have a coat, but she does have momentum. And we spoke with her aboard her campaign bus earlier today.
People are realizing, you know what? She's actually doing better than anyone thought. And I think that's the story of my life, and that's the story of this campaign.
But tougher contests in Nevada and South Carolina, where Klobuchar is polling in single digits, lay ahead.
You talked about what you learned from your father being resiliency. Even if you do well in New Hampshire, it gets a lot harder after this.
It does. I'm a good campaigner, and I find a way to keep moving. And Nevada's a state. This is something people haven't realized. 2 women in the U.S. Senate. They have elected a majority women legislature. And so there's going to be some interesting things that are advantages to me in Nevada.
Do you think it's been the policy that's connected, or it's when you get personal with voters that connects?
I think that they are looking for someone that they believe and that they can trust.
You talk about empathy. People like Trump because he's a fighter.
Sure, but I'm a fighter too. I think we need someone tough to take him on.
Mayor Bloomberg has now risen to 3rd place. How do you compete against that?
Well, Michael Bloomberg is a force. He has billions of dollars. I don't have billions of dollars. So I actually think it's good he's going to be on the debate stage, because I'm never going to be able to beat him on the airwaves, but I can beat him on the debate stage.
Iowa helped propel Pete Buttigieg, and now expectations here in New Hampshire are high.
What constitutes victory for you?
It will be very important for us to put up a very good showing, even knowing that we are competing against some competitors who are from right here in New England.
How do you appeal to the progressive wing of the Democratic Party?
Well, my message to progressives is simple. I would be the most progressive president in the last half century. And yet, I'm also offering a way to do it that doesn't risk the further division and polarization that is already such a problem for our country.
There's a passion for Donald Trump.
He has his supporters and always will. But I'm also meeting so many people. They come to my events and they make it clear that they're used to voting Republican, but they're just sick of this. It's part of why I believe we need to build a movement that can welcome in those who will cross over. It's not going to be everybody.
Still to come, presidential hopeful Tom Steyer has left New Hampshire to rally voters in Nevada ahead of the state's caucuses. Ahead, we'll speak to his campaign's press secretary to find out how the businessman plans to rally voters there. You're streaming Red and Blue live from the Bonfire Country Bar in Manchester.
But some of us are right and some of us are wrong. Some of us are ready and some of us are not. Some of us know what we will do on day one, and some of us haven't really thought that through enough.
You can watch CBSN 24/7.
We've got an amazing story to share with you.
Let's talk about the latest developments. There's so many levels to this.
We have a CBS News exclusive.
Fires in California. What happens next, and how does it all play out?
We are on a mission with NASA.
I understand you have some breaking news. It's not over yet, is the bottom line.
This is a massive operation.
It's quite an adventure here at CBSN.
It's been a day. Wow. That's not normal.
nation's capital, decisions are made here that affect all of us. And today, more than ever, people want truth, understanding, and accountability. So join us every evening as we bring you CBS News original reporting from around the world, while keeping our eye on what's going on right here in Washington.
The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell, now from Washington, D.C. Understanding the world begins with the right questions.
Do you trust Kim Jong-un?
Doesn't the blame reside with Jewel? Is it now our top terrorist threat?
With the right people.
So you have forgiven?
I have now.
Right here.
Check this out.
More news.
I'm Tony DeCoppel with CBS News.
More original reporting.
It puts everything in perspective.
We are on a mission with NASA.
Every morning on CBS This Morning.
We're going to begin with breaking news.
The biggest names in politics.
Whoa, that's news. It seems Iran's behavior is getting worse, not better. Are we at a tipping point where those decisions, do you think that the investigation is in peril?
Face the questions you want answered.
Margot, it's a great question.
Good question. I do not know how to answer your question.
The president this morning tweeted something that I'd like you to clarify.
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan.
Wherever we have to go.
We've just flown along the coastline.
Whatever we have to do.
Tonight, police were throwing the first rounds of tear gas.
Every evening, we are focused.
This is the main highway to the hardest hit areas.
On finding and telling the truth.
How does that hamper or hurt our national security?
Even among the ashes, you can see the signs of deforestation.
And earning your trust.
You traveled the whole way with your son?
The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell.
While a number of Democratic candidates are in New Hampshire tonight, 2020 presidential hopeful Tom Steyer is campaigning in Nevada. The businessman left the Granite State to rally support with voters ahead of the upcoming Nevada caucus. Steyer has banked on Nevada and South Carolina as two must-win states in his run for the White House. Jake Lewis joins us now. He is the press secretary for the Steyer campaign. Jake, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
So, as the Democratic playing field is focused on New Hampshire, Tom Steyer is currently campaigning in Nevada. Why is he focusing his time and energy elsewhere on primary night?
You know, it's kind of like he said in the debate stage. We really have to have the broadest coalition possible going into November to defeat Donald Trump. And that's why we see his message resonating in those diverse states. So he's really focusing there so where he can take his message and get it to the most broadest, diverse audience possible.
But does he really have a viable path forward here without a decent showing in Iowa and New Hampshire?
You know, I think those states are so very different, and we're still seeing our poll numbers rise and our endorsements rise and our crowd numbers rise. And so he really is focusing on those places where his message is really resonating with that diverse coalition.
What made Nevada and South Carolina these two sort of pillars for your campaign?
You know, we just went in there and saw that his message as an outsider and really someone who can take on the corporate stranglehold of the government really resonating with those communities who often feel left behind by the American democracy. They feel underrepresented. They certainly don't feel heard by this president.
Mm-hmm.
So Tom's business background and his ability to kind of go in there as an outsider is really resonating with those communities who want someone to fight for them in D.C.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit,
Yeah.
though? Especially when you talk about connecting with minority voters, right? Tom Steyer is a Caucasian man who is a billionaire businessman.
Yes.
At first blush, it would not seem as though he had perhaps much in common with those kind of voters that he might be trying to
I don't know if it's so much even about much in common, is that he is so comfortable talking about these issues, and he's such an honest and sincere man that when they hear from him, they really hear that he's actually speaking something that he believes in. And to them, that's the most important part. They trust him. They know his expertise. He's been fighting for these issues for a long time, that he's not some stranger who came in late into the game. So for them, that authenticity is really key for them to connect with Tom.
So given what the Steyer campaign has invested in Nevada, and South Carolina. How critical is a win in one of those states?
You know, I think it is critical for us. It's obviously somewhere where we want to do well going into Super Tuesday and to keep seeing that momentum rise. We've seen our poll numbers rise, our endorsements rise, and so we're really hoping to keep that momentum going and proving to a bigger audience, especially on Super Tuesday, that he has actually something important to say.
Well, getting back to New Hampshire, I mean, what does the Steyer campaign consider to be success here in New Hampshire?
You know, I think here is we just want to beat expectations. I think we've been here, we have a great ground game, we've been all over the state, we've been here the last 5 days.
What does that mean, though, beating expectations?
You know, I don't think we have that kind of set number in it. The get race is so wide open. We saw the exit polls today that almost 50% of people made up their mind after the debate, or the debate influenced their decision. So here, expectations is kind of a broad term. I mean, 2 weeks ago, if you had said Amy Klobuchar was kind of the fastest rising candidate, I wouldn't have believed you, but here we are. So everything's kind of in flux in this state.
So we have seen Tom Steyer's numbers rise recently with African-American voters. Earlier today, he slammed Mayor Michael Bloomberg over his defense of the controversial stop and frisk policy enacted during his time as New York City mayor. Should we expect to see similar kinds of attacks from Steyer as we move forward?
You know, I think what you're going to see is that Mayor Bloomberg is becoming a more forceful presence in this race. Super Tuesday is obviously going to be a strategy of his. His record is going to be under scrutiny just like anyone else's, and that's a big part of it. And so I think if he's going to come up and try and be a representative of the Democratic Party, that should be examined, and it should really be refocused on in this new age.
Bottom line, if it's not a strong showing in Nevada and South Carolina for Tom Steyer, what does that mean for the campaign?
You know, we're going to keep going and see where we're at. We have field offices and staff growing in all those Super Tuesday states, so we're going to kind of see how it goes each state by state.
All right, Jake Lewis. Jake, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Really appreciate your time.
Absolutely.
Still to come, a New Hampshire Democratic congressman was among one of the state's many undecided voters before he cast his ballot. So did any of the candidates manage to sway his decision? We'll hear what he has to say next. You're streaming Red and Blue live from Manchester.
Some of the polling precincts in New Hampshire have closed, and in this, the first-in-the-nation primary, there are early indications of a possible first-class upset in the making. Senator Gary Hart of Colorado may, just may, turn out to have a good chance of beating the expected frontrunner Walter Mondale.
You can watch CBSN 24/7.
We've got an amazing story to share with you.
Let's talk about the latest developments. There's so many levels to this.
We have a CBS News exclusive.
Fires in California. What happens next, and how does it all play out?
We are on a mission with NASA.
I understand you have some breaking news. It's not over yet, is the bottom line.
This is a massive operation.
It's quite an adventure here at CBSN.
It's been a day. Wow. That's not normal.
Our nation's capital, decisions are made here that affect all of us. And today, more than ever, people want truth, understanding, and accountability. So join us every evening as we bring you CBS News original reporting from around the world, while keeping our eye on what's going on right here in Washington.
The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell, now from Washington, D.C. Understanding the world begins with the right questions.
Do you trust Kim Jong-un?
Doesn't the blame reside with Jewel? Is it now our top terrorist threat?
With the right people.
So you have forgiven.
I have now.
Right here.
Check this out.
More news.
I'm Tony DeCoppel with CBS News.
More original reporting.
It puts everything in perspective.
We are on a mission with NASA.
Every morning on CBS This Morning.
We're going to begin with breaking news.
The biggest names in politics.
Whoa, that's news. It seems Iran's behavior is getting worse, not better. Are we at a tipping point where those decisions, do you think that the investigation is in peril?
Face the questions you want answered.
Margo, that's a great question. Good question. I do not know how to answer your question.
The president this morning tweeted something that I'd like you to clarify.
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan.
Wherever we have to go.
We've just flown along the coastline.
Whatever we have to do.
The White police were throwing the first rounds of tear gas.
Every evening we are focused.
This is the main highway to the hardest hit areas.
On finding and telling the truth.
How does that hamper or hurt our national security?
Even among the ashes, you can see the signs of deforestation.
And earning your trust.
You traveled the whole way with your son?
The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell.
Good morning to you and welcome to CBS This Morning.
Understanding the world.
We're going to begin with breaking news.
Begins with the right questions.
Have police discovered a motive? Does the president have a red line here?
What can voters expect to see today?
Join Gayle King, Anthony Mason, and Tony DeCopel on CBS This Morning.
We know a little more this morning.
This is a major development.
This is a very serious situation.
More news every morning on the show everyone is talking about.
We have much more news ahead for you.
CBS This Morning.
In New Hampshire, voters have been at the polls casting their ballots in the first primary of 2020. On Monday, Democratic Congressman Pappas, who represents New Hampshire's 1st District, posted this tweet of his absentee ballot and encouraged New Hampshire to get out and vote. But the freshman congressman has not yet publicly endorsed any one Democratic candidate. Earlier today, my colleague Lana Zach asked him about New Hampshire's first-in-the-nation status and whether he's ready to make an endorsement.
I purposefully did not get involved in the primary contest. I thought it was really important that the voters of New Hampshire were leading this effort, having really authentic conversations with the voters, doing what New Hampshire voters do best. And for me, I'm focused on my work here in Washington, but I'm excited to see the amount of energy and engagement that exists across our state. So, I'm not weighing in a public way in terms of, who I might have voted for or making any endorsements today. This is about the people of New Hampshire making that choice and then allowing the rest of America to weigh in as well.
Very unusual of you, and we see that Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg are certainly emerging as the two leading candidates there in your state. One obviously calling himself a Democratic socialist, the other a moderate. And as a freshman lawmaker, you're part of a new younger face of Congress. Do you feel like the Democratic Party is really divided along those two lines?
I don't necessarily think so. I think that what characterizes the new class in Congress, the freshman members that were elected in 2018, is that they're proximate to their districts. They understand what is on the minds of their constituents. And that may look like different things to different people, but I think we all ran in part to give voice to those concerns that had languished, frankly, for far too long here in Washington. So I think what voters want across the spectrum is a substantive conversation. And even folks that you hear that might be voting for Donald Trump today in the New Hampshire primary, voters that are voting in the Democratic contest, they want a really robust conversation about those kitchen table issues. So that's where I think this contest needs to go. And I think the candidates that are able to best connect on, how we can make this economy work for everyone, how we can protect our environment, invest in infrastructure, protect health care, those are the ones that are going to do the best today.
And do you think that the Democratic Party is really united along those lines? Particularly, you mentioned health care, and that's one area in which there are very different ideas about how the United States should repair our health care system between those two top frontrunners.
There are competing ideas, but I think what unites Democrats and many independents and even some Republicans is the value that health care should be treated not as a privilege for the wealthy or the few, but as a right for every American. And so we need to take some additional steps to make sure that everyone is covered and that that coverage is affordable for individuals. That's what we all talked about in our campaigns in 2018. And I think what largely unites the Democratic field. I'll say this. I think I've never seen more folks less sure about their choice, not because they don't feel that there are good options to select for the nominee for our party for president, but because they know the stakes are high. They know what's happening right now in our political system, and they know we got to get back to a point where we can actually address some of these issues in a fundamental way. So I think for Democrats today, they might be able to render a verdict in New Hampshire, but I think they'll largely be satisfied with whoever the party selects as its nominee to try to beat Donald Trump in November.
Well, we certainly see that in our CBS News polling, that's the number one concern among voters. Speaking about New Hampshire and just coming off of the Iowa caucuses, there have been a lot of critiques about whether these two states should really retain their first-in-the-nation status, because critics say that these two states don't really represent the country. And we were hearing the same thing from former Vice President Biden, who is immediately going to take off and head to South Carolina. So Do you still think that this is the right way for the Democratic Party to choose the nominee?
Well, certainly a primary is a different animal than a caucus, and so we'll see broader participation today than we saw in Iowa. And also, frankly, it's a state-run election, and so it'll go a lot more smoothly, and we'll have a very clear verdict rendered tonight by the voters of New Hampshire. But I think the 4 early states taken together represent the diversity of America, and I think there is a benefit to starting in states that have a small scale where you can have the type of intimate campaigning and hear the type of concerns directly from the voters that you do in New Hampshire. Frankly, I don't know that we would have seen plans from so many of the leading candidates in 2016 on the opioid crisis had these candidates not come to New Hampshire and heard really heart-wrenching personal stories from voters about folks struggling in their families and people that were lost to the opioid epidemic. So I think these conversations make a difference to shape the national debate. I don't know that we would have them in the same meaningful way if we were really just in these big media-driven states where the candidates don't get proximate to the voters. So that's where I think the value is that New Hampshire can add. And we've had this institution, this New Hampshire primary, for over 100 years now. We started it in part to take power away from the party bosses and to put it in the hands of the voters who can directly select the nominees of the parties. And I think it's still relevant and really important to how our system functions.
So you know New Hampshire, obviously. The whole nation right now is looking at your state. Anything that you think might ultimately end up surprising folks who are watching the results of tonight's primary from the outside?
One of the things I think we should watch is where the independent vote goes. 42% of the registered voters in New Hampshire are not affiliated with either major party, and so they can participate in either contest. So I think it'll be instructive to see where those independents are voting, if they're picking up a Democratic ballot or a Republican ballot today, in overwhelming numbers. In addition to that, I think we should look at some of the candidates that might be outside of what we consider to be the top tier and how they're performing. So does, an Amy Klobuchar exceed expectations? Does a Joe Biden not quite meet expectations in New Hampshire? That can have ramifications for what happens beyond our state. So I think there's an opportunity to shape the national debate and also what the field looks like from this point on. And I think voters in the rest of the country are, looking forward to participating in this contest too. I think they would benefit from having a somewhat narrower set of choices so that the verdict can be clearer on where Democrats want to go for their nominee.
Well, we will be watching for all of that. Congressman Pappas of New Hampshire, thank you.
While we wait to see the numbers, I want to bring in Linda Tran, Leslie Sanchez, and Antoine Seawright. Linda is a CBSN political contributor and Democratic strategist. Leslie is a CBS News political contributor and Republican strategist. Antoine is a CBS News political contributor and Democratic strategist. All right, so we looked at polling before tonight, and it showed that Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg were in this extremely tight race. So, Linda, what could the results from tonight mean for both of those candidates?
Well, I mean, if it ends up being the tight race that we're projecting or anticipating, that's a solid win for Pete Buttigieg. It wasn't very long ago that nobody knew who he was and couldn't pronounce his name. And here he is, toe-to-toe with a candidate who won the state last cycle by 22 points. And so if that ends up being the outcome, that is a solid win for Pete's campaign.
Yeah, what are you watching for, Antoine, with these two?
I think there will be a number of people who will have the ability to claim victory tonight. Victory in a place like New Hampshire is definitely subjective versus objective. You will have a momentum claim of victory from Bernie and Pete, and you will have this tremendous energy and surge from Amy Klobuchar, who, as I look at some of the early exits and some of the chatter around this election, she is surpassing Elizabeth Warren, who's the neighboring senator in New Hampshire. So I think she's going to claim some type of victory and momentum tonight. And keep in mind, when you are a candidate on the bubble, momentum turns into money, and money turns into more support, theoretically. So I think that's going to make a big difference tonight. You'll see a number of people claim victory, but you're also going to see some people have to make some tough decisions.
And Leslie, I want to ask you about somebody who is not on the ballot tonight, Michael Bloomberg. So President Trump said earlier today that he would rather run against Michael Bloomberg than Bernie Sanders. Bloomberg, as I said, not on the ballot, but is it significant that his campaign is getting this attention from President Trump?
It certainly is, and the Republican National Committee has obviously been pushing that audio that came from the Aspen Institute where he's talking about, like, Xerox and crime and African-American community. It's very pivotal. I think that's going to be damaging to some extent of this emerging campaign. This is a game, a high-contact sport in politics, and undermining the campaign early on when they were up with $300 million worth of advertising, that's a serious threat to the president. He's taking it seriously. And the gloves are off in terms of political points, gathering political points.
Antoine?
But you do not attack what you do not fear in this business. And I think there's some real fear from the Republican Party about the idea of Mayor Bloomberg possibly being our nominee because of his resources. He is one of very few people in the Democratic space who can push back pound for pound with the president and all of the Republican entities that follow about anything relating to his record, or he can also block and tackle. So he can block out what they're trying to do and tackle the issues that are important to the American people, as well as define the president for his negatives. And I think that's why you see it. That's why you saw it with Biden, and now you're starting to see the shift to Mayor Bloomberg.
I think the difference is it's such an unknown. It's very much a distraction, but you don't know what massive amounts, billions of dollars put this early into a presidential campaign is going to have on the impact, whether or not he is the nominee, how that rolls out, and, is the Democratic Party ready to have this battle of billionaires? It's really hard to say. That's the heart of the Democratic Party.
All right, I'm afraid we have to leave it there for now. Linda Tran, Leslie Sanchez, Antoine Seawright, thank you all very much. We are going to take a quick break. Polls close in just a few moments in New Hampshire. We'll have full coverage of those results when we come back. Stay with us. You're streaming Red and Blue.
You can watch CBSN 24/7.
We've got an amazing story to share with you.
Let's talk about the latest developments. There's so many levels to this.
We have a CBS News exclusive.
Fires in California. What happens next, and how does it all play out?
We are on a mission with NASA.
I understand you have some breaking news. It's not over yet, is the bottom line.
This is a massive operation.
It's quite an adventure here at CBSN.
It's been a day.
See the desperation in the journey simply by looking at the trail that's left behind.
So she says she's 17. She looks kind of like she's 12.
Said to me, if you tried to do this in New York City, take a picture of a man, he'd break your camera.
There's something very, very uncomfortable about this.
Today, a white supremacist lens.
This area can be the new Silicon Valley.
There was not a cot in the warehouse, not one cot in the warehouse.
We're so far deep at this point that there's no turning back. This is a long road ahead.
Our nation's capital, decisions are made here that affect all of us. And today, more than ever, people want truth, understanding, and accountability. So join us every evening as we bring you CBS News original reporting from around the world, while keeping our eye on what's going on right here in Washington.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell, now from Washington, D.C. Understanding the world begins with the right questions.
Do you trust Kim Jong-un?
Doesn't the blame reside with Jewel? Is it now our top terrorist threat?
With the right people.
So you have forgiven. I have now.
Right here.
Check this out.
More news.
I'm Tony DeCoppel with CBS News.
More original reporting.
It puts everything in perspective.
We are on a mission with NASA.
Every morning on CBS This Morning.
We're going to begin with breaking news.
biggest names in politics.
Whoa, that's news. Are we at a tipping point?
Face the questions you want answered.
Margo, that's a great question.
Good question. Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan.
Wherever we have to go,
We've just flown along the coastline.
whatever we have to do,
The Red Police were throwing the first rounds of tear gas.
we are focused on finding and telling the truth and earning your trust. The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C.
I'm Elaine Quijano, live from the Bonfire Country Bar in Manchester, New Hampshire. The last polls have just closed, and we are getting in the first results. Right now, CBS News is characterizing it as a three-way race, with Bernie Sanders holding an edge. Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar are neck and neck behind him. Joe Biden and Elizabeth Warren are having poor showings. Tonight's primary is crucial to the presidential candidates and could help narrow down the Democratic field. While we wait to see the numbers, I want to bring in James Pindell, Linda Tran, Leslie Sanchez, Antoine Seawright, and Caitlin Huey-Burns. James is a political reporter for the Boston Globe. Linda is a CBSN political contributor and Democratic strategist. Leslie is a CBS News political contributor and Republican strategist. Antoine is a CBS News political contributor and Democratic strategist. And Caitlin, of course, is our intrepid CBSN political reporter. Caitlin, I want to start with you. You are at a Pete Buttigieg event in Nashua, New Hampshire. Tell us what the feeling there is tonight from the Buttigieg campaign.
That's right, Elaine. We just rushed from your set a half hour down the road to Nashua, where the Pete Buttigieg campaign is based. They're going to be looking at the results coming in. They have a big screen down behind me, and the crowd here was counting down to 8 o'clock, waiting for those polls to close and cheering at the close of them. They also are looking at the returns coming in so far. They seem to be happy with where Buttigieg is standing. Let's just take a minute to kind of think about where Buttigieg wants to go tonight. He came out of Iowa in that kind of chaotic caucus process a week ago, claiming victory there without the results, headed straight to Iowa, actually beat us getting on the ground, straight to New Hampshire, beat us getting on the ground here, and has been having at least 5 events per day here on the ground in New Hampshire, all across the state. And they've really been focusing on these 42% of voters here who are unaffiliated with the party and can participate in the Democratic Party of the primary if they wanted to. They certainly sensed an opening in Joe Biden's support, seeing how they outpaced him significantly in Iowa, particularly in those counties that swung from Obama to Trump in 2016. But what they're dealing with now on the ground here, too, is the rise of Amy Klobuchar. And you can see in those early returns that she could be poised to have a good night as well. So I think the storyline tonight is, as Joe Biden, the former vice president, has already left the state, headed to South Carolina today, kind of giving up on New Hampshire, where are those potential supporters going? Where are those supporters in the more moderate lane of the party going? Are they going to Buttigieg? Are they going to Amy Klobuchar? And kind of what does that do moving forward? And, you know, I talked to a lot of voters on the ground here at Pete Buttigieg events over the past few days who said that they wanted someone that has a fresh face, that can bring new ideas for the party. And so we'll see if he's able to really capitalize on the momentum that he created for himself in Iowa. But this seems like an excited crowd. The music is going, and we'll see how it goes.
And James, let me turn to you. When you look at where things stand at this moment, obviously it's early in the night, but you see that Amy Klobuchar, as Caitlin was pointing out, really seems to be capitalizing, at least so far, on what they've been calling momentum here in these final days leading up to
there was 2 numbers you really focused on those early exit numbers. One was the number of young people that voted, which was significantly down. That is a big driving factor as to why this race may be as close as it was. Of course, Bernie Sanders crushed it among young people here in 2016. He was really hoping to do that here this time. That's why he finished his whole campaign with a major rally at the University of New Hampshire. I don't know if there's one or two things that could have happened there with him. One, he just ended up not driving out the turnout. Second, there is a new voter law in this state that has caused a lot of controversy that may make it more complicated on the back end, particularly for college students to vote. Democrats have tried to put this in lawsuit. You've heard presidential candidates talk about that. I'm not sure if that's at play or just Sanders didn't drive him out. But to your point about Klobuchar, look, this number right now is only going to get better for her. And the reason is you look at where these numbers are coming in from. They're largely in the northern part of New Hampshire.
All right, hold that thought for just a moment. We have just been told, CBS News can now report, according to Andrew Yang's campaign manager, he is confirming that Andrew Yang is suspending his campaign. This is now official from Andrew Yang's campaign manager, confirming he's suspending his campaign. I want to maybe get your thoughts, Linda Tran, because as a Democratic strategist, we watched as he appeared to kind of have some staying power. We're going to, by the way, take you to this Yang event just as soon as Andrew Yang speaks to his supporters there. But as we wait for that to happen, it was an interesting sort of place that he occupied, not really a traditional lane, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Andrew is, on a personal note, I know him myself. I think he's super interesting in general. He's very open-minded, all of those things that we saw on the campaign trail, that collegial nature, and just fundamental belief in the power of universal basic income to address poverty and elevate economic opportunity in this country. That's not something that he invented for the campaign. It's a movement that he's been part of for several years now, and something he's certainly very committed to. I think he'd be the first to say he was a rather unlikely candidate. He was able to harness, we're talking about the interest of young people. He was able to harness a movement of Yang Gang acolytes who were interested in what he was selling, essentially.
So active on social media.
So active, and that was what powered his ability to stay in the race up until now. Lots of small dollar donations. We kept seeing the FEC filing showing him in the millions, and I think that really kind of surprised people. I'll be interested to see if he decides to come out and show some support, endorse one of the candidates that are left in the field or not. Suffice it to say, I don't think this is the last that we've seen of him.
All right. As we continue to keep our eye on that event, let's turn to the Broadcast Center, CBS News Broadcast Center in New York, where our CBS News Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto, is standing by. So, Anthony, we're going to continue to keep our eye on this Andrew Yang event. Apologies in advance if we have to interrupt, but what is it that you have for us? What can you tell us?
I just want to quickly let you know why we characterized the race as we did coming out at 8 o'clock. You see Bernie Sanders out in front of what is effectively a three-way race right now at 28, then 22, and 20. Amy Klobuchar clearly outperforming her pre-election polling right there. But let me zoom you in here a little bit. I'm going to show you Manchester, New Hampshire. This is one place where it could be key for Bernie Sanders. We're starting to get some data in there, Elaine. And just around here in the Manchester, New Hampshire area, our estimates have Bernie Sanders doing even a little bit better than that at 28-21. That's coming off of some of our exit poll precincts, so it's very preliminary. But it's one of the things we're going to be watching. And it's one of the reasons we can say, at least at this point, that it's Sanders out ahead of what is a three-way race, Elaine.
All right, Anthony Salvanto, we will check back in with you throughout the night. Back on the topic of Andrew Yang, Antoine, I'm going to ask you next. What do you make of this news that he's suspending his campaign? And as Linda was saying, where do you think that support now goes, those people who are standing behind Andrew
So
Yang?
there's several ways to look at this. Number one, you now have only one candidate of color left in the Democratic nomination process, when at the beginning of this process, everyone agrees that the diversity of our party, particularly black and brown voters, are such a key component of our long and short-term success. Number two, I think this is just a prime example of which I always talk about, of how there's a disconnect between the social media bubble and the reality of what's on the ground. There's no doubt in my mind, Andrew Yang had a hell of a following on social media. He was busy. They were very interactive. And you would think that his support was wide and deep. But that did not transfer to the first 2 states in this nomination process. And I think that's been a lesson for a number of candidates who are no longer with us in this process. What's in the bubble and what's on social media is totally different than what's on the hearts and minds of voters. And you can take that same thinking and position when you look at the policy agenda and the policy issues that tends to connect with voters. What it also means is that those voters are going to have to find a home. They're non-traditional Democratic likely voters. And so I think the most attractive candidate off the surface could be Mayor Pete, and he could really benefit from being a new shockwave of energy into this nomination process.
Well, look, I mean, Andrew Yang is a political newcomer. It's incredible that he's some random guy with an idea that got this far to the New Hampshire primary night, and he bested out, 14 other Democrats who were governors, and they were senators, and they were members of Congress.
Sitting senators,
It's incredible, but he made a tactical mistake. I was talking with him Saturday night, had an interview with him backstage. He knows he went all in on Iowa. He was told to go all in on Iowa. It was a huge mistake. He was able to raise a lot of money. He was an interesting candidate here in New Hampshire. If he had focused here, this is a part of his regrets. He thinks he would have been a bigger player, and we have not heard the last of Andrew Yang, and that's not a random statement. He told me he is interested in running again for president, maybe in 2024. We'll see. Obviously, it depends if the Democrat will be in the White House or not.
Prayerfully.
But he's not going to. But this again, it's an incredible moment for him that he got this far. He did make a very big tactical mistake, which he now says he owns, but we have not heard the last of him.
Yeah, I mean, what about that, though, a future for Andrew Yang? Linda, what are your thoughts on that in the Democratic Party here moving forward?
Well, I mean, I think the Democratic Party is always looking for young, fresh faces that have great ideas. And I think that, why I say that you haven't seen the last of him is I would not be surprised at all if he ended up in somebody's cabinet at some point, leading some part of government, assuming there's a Democratic administration. I mean, I will say this. It is not as if he didn't treat New Hampshire with some commitment and some investment. I mean, he was in this state for, he came to the state at least 24 times. He had more than 130 events all around the state. So it's not as if he didn't make a play for it.
On ads that he spent about $2 million on ads in Iowa when he had this money coming in, and he could have focused here and it made a bigger play. But I mean, what are you going to do? Get 6th place? He's between 6th and 9th place in Iowa, and who cares?
But make no mistake, this process and our party will be better because of Andrew Yang. I think he was one of the candidates that really pushed the conversation in a non-traditional way when you started thinking about universal income, what that means, and the people he was able to engage and involve. And I commend him because a good teammate knows they are not the person to perhaps take the shot when the big game is on the line, and Lord knows the big game is on the line for Democrats. And so he was able to step aside and say, you know what, someone else deserves to take the final shot.
I think ultimately what it really shows is how important organization is, right? I mean, and I think this is part of the point that Antoine was trying to make earlier about social media is great, it's fun, and today's voter really expects to be able to engage on that level. But if you want to win a campaign, you have to be able to organize, you have to have discipline, you have to have a structure that will allow you to turn those, curious individuals into voters.
Yeah, at the same time, Leslie, as we continue to keep our eye on this event where we expect to see Andrew Yang, if you're just joining us, who is going to be suspending his 2020 campaign, we're going to take you to that event just as soon as it happens. You talk about social media. President Trump has an incredible connection with people and uses that Twitter platform unlike any other commander-in-chief has ever before. And as a candidate, that was something that was kind of scoffed at, frankly, by a lot of people, including political pundits, as being sort of a very out there kind of way to reach out to voters. And yet we have only seen his incredible social media following grow here over time.
Right. It's over 74 million people right now that he has direct communication with. He doesn't have to wait and do an interview, though he does it exclusively on perhaps Fox or other places that he feels he has a very friendly, receptive a set of journalists and commentators. I want to go back to Andrew Yang for a specific reason. He used technology to his benefit. He was somebody who's not a traditional candidate, having never been elected, but he's also somebody who raised the specter to say, in the last debate, you are focused on the problem, like on the symptoms, but not really the problem. You're not offering solutions that are a good contrast to understand the economy, why people may want to choose a Democrat over a Republican. He was the smartest guy with the smartest line in that debate, and I think the ramifications are really impactful.
Let's go ahead and
redirected the focus.
Let's go ahead and listen in here. Just take a moment as Andrew Yang greets his supporters. Let's listen.
Hello, New Hampshire. you so much for being here. And I want to give a special thank you to my rock, my wife, Evelyn, who's been with us every step of the way. I love you and appreciate you so much, baby. Thank you so much. New Hampshire and everyone who supported this campaign, thank you for everything you've done to make this campaign possible over these past months. You all have uplifted me and inspired me and Evelyn in this campaign at every turn. Your passion and energy, your donations, and hundreds of thousands of hours calling, volunteering, your enthusiasm, dedication, and commitment. We've accomplished so much together. We have brought a message of humanity first and a vision of an economy and society that works for us and our families to millions of our fellow Americans. We went from a mailing list that started with just my Gmail contact list to receiving donations from over 400,000 people around the country and millions more who've supported this campaign. One of the things I'm most proud of, we gave $1,000 a month to 13 families around the country, including Jody Fassey right here in New Hampshire. We highlighted the real problems in our communities as our economy is being transformed before our eyes by technology and automation. And Americans know now that when you go to a factory in Michigan, you do not find wall-to-wall immigrants doing work. You find wall-to-wall robot arms and machines doing the work that people used to do. We stood on the debate stage and shifted our national conversation to include the fourth industrial revolution, a topic no one wanted to touch until we made it happen here with this campaign. Our signature proposal, universal basic income, has become part of the mainstream conversation. We increased the popular support for universal basic income to 66% of Democrats and 72% among voters 18 to 34. Without a doubt, we accelerated the eradication of poverty in our society by years, even generations. And that is thanks to all of you who are here tonight. Though thousands of voters came out for our campaign tonight, tonight is not the outcome we fought so hard to achieve. It is bitterly disappointing for many of us, but it shouldn't be. Every single day I've been campaigning, I've had supporters say to me, "Your campaign helped me out of a depression. Thank you." Working on this campaign has made me a better person. I met my significant other because of you. Your campaign brought my family together. Your campaign got me excited about politics for the first time. These are all things that people have said to me in the past days, and they are the reasons why I am so incredibly proud of this campaign and what we've accomplished together. We have touched and improved millions of lives and moved this country we love so much in the right direction. And while there is great work left to be done, you know I am the math guy, and it is clear tonight from the numbers that we are not going to win this race. I am not someone who wants to accept donations and support in a race that we will not win. And so tonight I am announcing I am suspending my campaign for president. We love you, Andrew! Thank you, I love you too. Thank you, New Hampshire. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, New Hampshire. I love you too. This is not an easy decision or something I made lightly with the team. Endings are hard, and I've always had the intention to stay in this race until the very end. But I have been persuaded that the message of this campaign will not be strengthened by my staying in this race any longer. Endings are hard, New Hampshire, but this is not an ending. This is a beginning. This is just the starting line. This campaign has awakened something fundamental in this country and ourselves. This is the movement! Yeah! This movement has outlasted over a dozen senators, governors, and members of Congress to become the most exciting force in this entire race. The Yang Gang has fundamentally shifted the direction of this country and transformed our politics, and we are only continuing to grow. I'd like to thank my incredible staff and the hundreds of people who left their lives and their jobs to join and build this campaign. I know what a risk that was. Very few people joined this campaign because they thought it was going to be a good career move. So thank you. Thank you to my team. My goal when I first started running was to solve the problems that got Donald Trump elected. In order to do that, I will support whoever is the Democratic nominee. That said, I hope this campaign can be a message and a word of caution and guidance to my Democratic colleagues that Donald Trump is not the cause of all of our problems. He is a symptom of a disease that has been building up in our communities for years. We must cure the disease that got him elected. And in order to do that, we must address the real problems that affect our people and offer solutions to actually solve them. I stand before you tonight and say that while we did not win this election, we are just getting started. This is the beginning. This movement is the future of American politics. This movement is the future of the Democratic Party.
Andrew Yang announcing that he is suspending his campaign. Let's take you now over to Senator Elizabeth Warren, who is also speaking at this hour. She's also in Manchester, New Hampshire. Let's listen in.
For our nomination up for grabs, and Americans in every part of the country are going to make their voices heard. That's right. The question for us Democrats is whether it will be a long, bitter rehash of the same old divides in our party, or whether we can find another way. Senator Sanders and Mayor Buttigieg are both great people, and either one of them would be a far better president than Donald Trump. I respect them both. But the fight between factions in our party has taken a sharp turn in recent weeks, with ads mocking other candidates and with supporters of some candidates shouting curses at other Democratic candidates. These harsh tactics might work if you are willing to burn down the rest of the party in order to be the last man standing. They might work if you don't worry about leaving our party and our politics worse off than how you found it. And they might work if you think only you